The Harrington estate had always been a fortress of wealth and arrogance. Its tall iron gates loomed like sentinels, polished every morning by staff who were forbidden even to glance too long at the mansion inside. To the outside world, the Harringtons were a dynasty, untouchable, refined, dripping in the luxury of old money. But to those who worked inside those walls, the truth was different. The truth was cruelty disguised as charm, mockery delivered with a smile, and power wielded like a whip. Tonight, the estate was ablaze with celebration. Chandeliers spilled golden light across velvet curtains. 100 guests, dressed in gowns and tuxedos, moved through the ballroom with flutes of champagne in hand. The Harrington family stood at the center of it all, their laughter echoing louder than the orchestra that played in the background. Lady Eleanor Harrington, elegant in her emerald dress, clinked her glass to demand attention. Beside her stood Charles, her husband, a man with a booming voice and a belly that spoke of indulgence. And just behind them, grinning with smug satisfaction, was their son Victor, slick-haired, arrogant, his eyes constantly searching for someone to belittle. But in the corner of the room, unseen by most, stood a frail woman in a faded uniform. Her apron was stained, her hands cracked with years of work. Her name was Martha, the Harringtons' maid for over 3 decades. She had cooked their meals, cleaned their floors, raised their child when Lady Eleanor could not be bothered, and endured every insult thrown her way. Tonight, she had been ordered to serve drinks. Nothing more, nothing less. But as she quietly carried a tray past the gleaming guests, laughter erupted around her. Victor pointed at her with his champagne flute, smirking. "Look at Martha," he sneered. "Still here after all these years. I swear she's like part of the furniture." His friends roared with laughter. One of them added, "Furniture has more style than that old rag." The laughter grew. Guests turned, snickering behind their glasses, whispering jokes about her hunched back and wrinkled skin. Martha's cheeks burned, but she kept her eyes down. She had learned long ago that answering back only made things worse. She clutched the tray tighter, willing her trembling hands to stay still. Lady Eleanor raised her hand, silencing the room. Now, Victor. Don't waste your wit on the help. She doesn't even understand half the words you use." A ripple of laughter followed her remark, and Charles bellowed with approval, slapping his son on the back. Martha bowed her head lower, hiding the tears threatening to spill. But in the corner, someone else had been watching. A tall man in a tailored black suit, his presence quiet but commanding. His name was Jonathan Pierce, the Harrington family lawyer. He had been summoned tonight under the guise of celebrating Charles's latest business venture. But he had come for another reason. One none of them suspected. The party continued, but the energy had shifted. The Harringtons were basking in their cruelty, oblivious to the storm building just outside their golden walls. For Martha had not come tonight empty-handed. In her pocket, folded and worn from years of hiding, was a letter. And that letter held a truth so powerful it could bring the Harrington empire crashing down. Victor, bored of mocking Martha, turned his attention to impressing a young woman in a silver gown. He boasted of his family's wealth, their properties, their influence in the city. "We've built everything," he declared. "This entire city bends to the Harrington name. People like Martha should be grateful we even let them live in our world." The words struck Martha like a blade, but she bit her tongue. "Not yet. Not here." Then Jonathan Pierce cleared his throat. The sound cut through the noise like thunder. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice deep and steady. "If I may, there is a matter that must be addressed." The room stilled. Eleanor arched a brow. "Jonathan, must this be done now? We're in the middle of a celebration." Jonathan's gaze was unwavering. "Yes, it must be done now. Because the man whose name built this legacy, your father, Lady Eleanor, left instructions. Instructions that can no longer be ignored." A hush fell over the room. The mention of the late patriarch, Henry Harrington, was rare. He had died years ago, and with his passing, the family had seized control of his empire. Few knew what kind of man he truly was. But tonight, his presence returned in the form of sealed words waiting to be spoken. Jonathan reached into his case and pulled out an envelope, yellowed with age. The Harrington crest was pressed into the wax seal. "This," he said slowly, "is Henry Harrington's last will and testament, and it contains stipulations that will affect every single one of you." The guests gasped. Eleanor's face tightened, Charles shifted uncomfortably, and Victor scoffed. "This is absurd. My grandfather left everything to us. Everyone knows that." Jonathan's eyes flicked to Martha, then back to the crowd. His lips curved into the faintest smile. "Not quite. There were conditions. The room leaned in, curiosity ignited. Conditions? What conditions could possibly threaten the Harringtons' iron grip on their fortune? Eleanor tried to laugh, though her voice trembled. Jonathan, really? Is this necessary? Tonight is about our triumphs, not dusty old papers. But Jonathan did not yield. Sometimes, Lady Harrington, the past demands to be heard. And tonight, Henry Harrington's words will speak. Martha's heart pounded in her chest. She had known this moment would come, but she had not expected it so soon. For decades she had endured humiliation, ridicule, and endless work without thanks. But she had always known, one day, the truth would rise. Jonathan broke the seal. The sound echoed through the silent ballroom. Guests leaned forward, eyes wide, waiting. The Harringtons stood stiff, their smiles brittle. Martha clutched the tray against her chest, her breath shallow. Jonathan unfolded the paper. His voice, when he read, was steady but heavy with meaning. I, Henry James Harrington, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this my last will and testament. The words rolled through the room, heavy with anticipation. Guests glanced at one another, wondering what twist could possibly be hidden inside. And then came the first revelation. To my family, I leave the Harrington estate, on the condition that they uphold the values of honor, respect, and gratitude to those who have served this house faithfully. Murmurs erupted. Eleanor's smile faltered. Charles cleared his throat. Victor scoffed loudly, muttering meaningless words. But Jonathan continued. Should they fail to meet this condition, the inheritance shall pass to Martha Williams. The tray slipped from Martha's hands, crashing to the floor. Glass shattered across the marble. The room erupted into chaos. Gasps, whispers, shouts. Eleanor's face drained of color, Charles's eyes bulged, Victor roared with laughter. Except it wasn't the laughter of confidence. It was the laughter of disbelief. This is insane, Victor shouted. A maid? Our fortune going to a maid. Jonathan held up a hand, silencing him. His eyes gleamed. This is only the beginning. There is more. Much more. The room went still again. Every guest's eyes darted between the trembling maid and the furious family. What else could possibly be hidden in those papers? Martha stood frozen, her heart thundering in her chest. For the first time in her life, all eyes were on her. Not as a servant, not as someone beneath them, but as someone who might hold their fate in her hands. And Jonathan's next words promised to shatter the night even further. Because what came next wasn't just about money. It was about betrayal. About secrets buried deep within the Harrington legacy. Secrets that could burn everything to the ground. And Jonathan was ready to reveal them all. The lawyer lowers the will, pauses, and says, "You think this is shocking? Wait until you hear who Henry Harrington truly trusted, and why. That secret will change everything." Gasps rippled through the ballroom, but Jonathan Pierce hadn't even finished the first page. He folded the paper slowly, deliberately, letting silence weigh down the room like a storm cloud waiting to break. Victor's jaw clenched, his knuckles white around the stem of his champagne glass. Lady Eleanor's smile had turned into something sharp and brittle, like a mask about to crack. Charles shifted from foot to foot, his booming voice trapped in his throat. Martha stood frozen, her body trembling as though the ground beneath her had shifted. She couldn't understand what she had just heard. She had spent her life scrubbing these marble floors, scrubbing away the mud from boots that had trampled her dignity. And now, suddenly, the will of a man long buried was dragging her into the center of the golden light. Jonathan glanced at her briefly, before returning his gaze to the room. Henry Harrington's words are clear. The fortune stands only if his family upholds respect and gratitude toward those who have given their lives in service to this house. Otherwise, it all goes to Martha Williams. The guests erupted again, some with disbelief, some with thinly veiled amusement. A few even clapped mockingly. "The maid is the heiress?" one whispered. "Imagine that." Another muttered. Perhaps Henry finally lost his mind before the end. Victor's voice cut through the noise. "This is a circus. Jonathan, you can't seriously expect us to believe my grandfather meant this. Martha is nothing. She's a shadow. She's—" "Careful," Jonathan said sharply, his eyes cold as steel. "Every word you speak now only proves his point." The insult hung in the air, heavier than any chandeliers above their heads. Victor froze, anger flashing in his eyes, but for once he had no clever comeback. He glanced at his mother for support. Eleanor stepped forward, her voice sharp and commanding. "Jonathan, I demand you put an end to this farce. My father adored this family. He would never, never, reduce us to begging at the feet of a servant." Jonathan's lips curved faintly. "You're right. He adored this family, but perhaps not in the way you believed. Because Henry Harrington didn't just write conditions. He wrote confessions. The room stilled again. The word confessions cut deep, drawing every eye back to the lawyer. He opened another folded sheet, smaller, handwritten. The ink faded but still legible. His voice dropped lower, forcing the room to lean in. Your father wrote of the things he witnessed within these walls. Of arrogance, cruelty, the breaking of spirits. He wrote about how wealth had turned his family into tyrants. The gasp this time was sharper, almost painful. Charles shook his head, muttering under his breath. Eleanor's fingers tightened on her necklace until her knuckles whitened. Jonathan read on. He wrote, and I quote, "If my family ever treats the people who built this house as less than human, then let them feel the weight of their own disregard. Let them know what it means to be powerless in the very halls they thought they owned." Silence fell so heavy, it seemed to choke the air from the room. The Harringtons, who only moments ago had commanded every glance, now stood like figures painted in shame. And then came the real twist. Jonathan lowered the paper and looked directly at Martha. But Henry Harrington didn't stop there. He named someone he trusted more than his own flesh and blood. Someone he believed carried the heart this family had lost. Martha's knees nearly gave way. She whispered, "No." Jonathan's gaze held hers. "Yes. Henry Harrington named you, Martha Williams, as the custodian of his legacy. Not just the estate. Not just the fortune. The legacy itself." The tray at her feet lay shattered, glass glittering like stars against the marble. She felt as though the world had gone silent, leaving only the roar of her heartbeat in her ears. She wanted to protest, to cry out that this couldn't be true. But deep down, she remembered something. An afternoon decades ago when Henry Harrington had found her crying in the kitchen, her hands raw from scrubbing, her spirit nearly broken from Eleanor's harsh words. He had sat beside her, placed a hand on her shoulder, and whispered, "One day, Martha, they'll see your worth." The memory hit her like a wave, and for the first time, her trembling steadied. But the Harringtons were not steady. They were unraveling. Victor stormed forward, his voice cracking with rage. "Enough! She's a liar. You're a liar. This is some twisted trick." He snatched the papers from Jonathan's hand and scanned the pages, his lips moving furiously. But the handwriting was undeniable. The signature, stamped with Henry's seal, was undeniable. His hands shook as he hurled the papers onto the floor. "This can't be real." Jonathan's calm voice carried over his outburst. "It is very real. And if you think this is shocking, wait until you hear what else Henry left behind." A ripple of gasps circled again. Jonathan let the words hang, then continued. He wrote that hidden within this estate lies proof of the Harrington family's greatest betrayal. Proof that would destroy not only your fortune, but your reputation in the city. The room buzzed with whispers, fear mixing with curiosity. Guests who had come to sip champagne and bask in the Harrington glow now shifted uneasily, wondering if they were witnessing the collapse of giants. Eleanor's voice cracked with controlled fury. "Jonathan, you will not drag my family's name through the mud with ghost stories and cheap theatrics." Jonathan's eyes glinted. "Ghost stories? No. Hard truth. And I'm afraid the ghosts themselves have come knocking." At that moment, the heavy double doors of the ballroom creaked open. The crowd turned as the sound echoed through the silence. A figure stepped into the light, an older man with weathered hands and eyes that carried decades of pain. Behind him came another, and another. Workers, servants, faces once forgotten, faces dismissed by the Harringtons. People who had given their lives to this house and received nothing but humiliation in return. Gasps broke through the crowd. A woman whispered, "I know that man. He was dismissed by Charles 20 years ago without pay." Another added, "That woman raised Victor when Eleanor traveled abroad. She was cast out like garbage." Eleanor's mask shattered. Her voice rose, high and furious. "What is this? Jonathan, how dare you?" "Not me," Jonathan interrupted. "Them." The group of former workers moved closer, their footsteps echoing like thunder. Their eyes locked on the Harringtons with a mixture of pain, anger, and vindication. Charles stepped forward, his booming voice faltering. "You don't belong here. Get out before I have you thrown out." But one of the men, his voice deep and scarred by years of labor, replied, "You threw us out long ago. Tonight, we've come to watch you fall." The guests murmured louder, whispers swelling into open shock. The Harrington name, once untouchable, was bleeding in front of them. And Martha stood at the center of it all, the one name Henry had trusted. Jonathan raised the will once more. Henry Harrington demanded that the truth be revealed in the presence of witnesses. That truth is being revealed now. And trust me, the worst is yet to come. Martha's breath caught. The worst? What could be worse than this? Jonathan's voice dropped lower, a whisper that carried across the room. Because hidden within this will is not just inheritance. It is a confession about who really built this empire, and who it was stolen from. The chandeliers seemed to tremble, their light flickering across pale faces. The Harringtons clutched at their pride like a lifeline, but it was slipping fast. And then Jonathan closed the folder slowly, his eyes gleaming with finality. But perhaps we should save that truth for later tonight. The ballroom erupted in shouts of protest, cries of curiosity, demands for answers. Guests surged forward, desperate to know what secrets remained. But Jonathan only raised his hand. Patience. If you think this night has reached its peak, you are very wrong. The next revelation will change everything you thought you knew about this family. All eyes swung back to Martha. The maid who had been mocked as furniture was now the axis upon which the entire night spun. She could feel their stares digging into her skin, waiting for her reaction, her next move. She wanted to run, but she couldn't. Because for the first time, she realized Henry Harrington hadn't left her a burden. He had left her a weapon. And the Harringtons had no idea how sharp it was. Jonathan locks eyes with Martha and says quietly, "Henry left one more letter, sealed and addressed only to you. And inside it lies the truth that will decide whether this family survives or burns." The sealed envelope sat heavy in Jonathan's hand, the wax glinting red beneath the chandeliers. The crowd leaned forward, breathless, straining to see. Martha stared at it, as though it were a snake poised to strike. Jonathan turned the envelope slowly, almost theatrically, then extended it toward her. "This," he said, his voice carrying through the silence, "was written by Henry Harrington himself. Sealed by his hand. Addressed to Martha Williams alone." Gasps rustled like wind through the hall. Eleanor stepped forward sharply, her diamond necklace flashing under the light. "Absolutely not. Whatever is in that letter is family business, and she, Jonathan cut in, his eyes hard, is the only one your father trusted enough to tell the truth." The words landed like a hammer. Eleanor froze, her lips parted in disbelief. Victor let out a bark of laughter, brittle and desperate. "You expect us to believe he confided in her? A maid? This is beyond absurd." Jonathan didn't respond. He simply held out the envelope. "Martha?" Her hands shook as she stepped forward. She had spent her life serving these people, bowing her head, swallowing their insults like bitter medicine. And now here she was, the center of it all. She reached out slowly, her fingertips brushing the rough paper, feeling the wax seal. The moment she touched it, a memory crashed into her. Henry's voice, soft yet commanding, echoing in her mind. "When the time comes, Martha, you will know what to do. Don't let fear silence you." Her chest tightened. Tears blurred her eyes, but she blinked them away. She broke the seal. The sound was louder than thunder. She unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. Her lips moved silently as she read, her face paling with each line. The crowd leaned in, desperate. Finally, Jonathan's voice broke the tension. "Read it aloud." Martha's voice quavered, but she obeyed. To Martha, "If you are reading this, then it means my family stands exposed, and the truth can no longer be buried. You were the only one in this house who ever treated me as a man, not as a name. You reminded me that even empires are built by hands that bleed. That is why I trusted you, and why I now place the weight of this legacy upon you." She paused, swallowing hard. The ballroom was silent, except for the crackling of torches outside. She continued, "You know as well as I do, Martha, the secret buried beneath these floors. The papers, the deeds, the stolen contracts. The night when a man came begging for mercy, and my family gave him none." A murmur swept the room like fire. Charles staggered back, his booming voice reduced to a whisper. "No, he wouldn't." Martha kept reading, her voice steadier now. "That man was James Carter. He built the first steel that raised this city skyward. He trusted the Harringtons, signed over his work to them in good faith. And they stole it. They left his family in ruins, while ours grew fat on the bones of their labor." The room erupted. Gasps, shouts, cries of disbelief. Several guests looked at one another in shock. Some even left in outrage, scandal flashing across their faces. The Harrington name was being carved apart in front of their eyes. Victor shouted over the chaos. "Lies. All of it lies. Carter was nothing, a drunk, a failure." But a voice rose from the crowd. A young woman stepped forward, her face etched with pain. "James Carter was my grandfather. And I've spent my life hearing how the Harringtons destroyed him. All eyes swung to her. She stood tall, her words sharp as broken glass. We lived in poverty because of you. My mother died working 3 jobs, while you people drank champagne from silver cups. Victor's face flushed scarlet. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Eleanor's hand shook as she clutched her pearls. Charles looked as if he might collapse. Jonathan raised his voice above the uproar. It doesn't end there. He nodded to Martha. Keep reading. Her eyes scanned the next lines, and the blood drained from her face. Martha, I write this not only as confession, but as warning. The Harrington fortune rests on stolen ground. If the truth is revealed fully, the empire will crumble, and the vultures will descend. You must choose, protect their name, or let the city finally know the cost of their wealth. She stopped, her hands trembling, so violently the letter nearly slipped from her grasp. The crowd roared with questions. What does it mean? Stolen ground. What else is buried here? Jonathan took the letter gently, his voice grave. Henry Harrington left maps, documents, proof, and he hid them within this estate. Tonight, they will be uncovered. The chandeliers flickered. The Harringtons looked as though the floor had opened beneath their feet. Victor's voice cracked with desperation. This is madness. There's no proof, none. This is just the rambling of a dying man. But even as he spoke, the heavy double doors opened once again. And into the golden hall walked another figure, an elderly black woman, her back stooped but her gaze sharp as fire. She carried a worn leather satchel, her steps slow but steady. Martha gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Clara? The room buzzed with confusion. Jonathan's lips tightened, as though he had expected this moment. The old woman's voice rang out, thin but unshakable. I was there, the night James Carter begged for mercy. I watched Charles Harrington spit in his face. And I've carried his papers ever since. Gasps, louder than ever, thundered across the ballroom. Clara opened her satchel and pulled out yellowed documents, edges frayed with time. She held them high for all to see. Victor staggered forward, his face twisted with fury. You're lying. You're nothing but another servant. But Clara only smiled sadly. Funny. That's what your father said to James Carter. Jonathan stepped forward, his voice clear as steel. The truth has arrived, and it is written in ink older than any of us. These papers will tell the story Henry himself was too ashamed to bury. The ballroom was chaos now, guests shouting, some demanding the Harringtons' answer for their crimes, others scrambling to distance themselves from the family's name. The empire that had once seemed untouchable was being shredded, thread by thread. And yet, amid the storm, Martha stood still. For the first time in her life, the Harringtons weren't above her. They were beneath the weight of the truth, and she was the one holding it. Jonathan leaned close to her, his words meant for her ears alone. Henry chose you for a reason. What you decide to do with this truth will either save this family, or destroy it forever. Her breath caught. The letter crumpled in her hand. She could feel the eyes of the room burning into her, waiting, demanding, judging. The moment was too heavy, too impossible. And yet she knew she couldn't run from it. Her voice broke as she whispered, I don't know if I'm strong enough. Jonathan's gaze was steady. Then remember this, Henry thought you were. The words struck deep. For the first time in years, Martha felt a fire spark within her chest. But before she could answer, the chandeliers above flickered violently. The lights dimmed, casting the ballroom in sudden, eerie shadow. The crowd gasped. A voice rang out from the corner of the room, low, mocking, venomous. So, the ghosts of the Harringtons finally rise. The guests turned sharply. A tall figure emerged from the shadows, dressed in black, his face half hidden. He strode into the light, and the room froze. His presence was electric, dangerous, like a storm about to break. Victor's face drained of color. Eleanor clutched Charles's arm. Martha's stomach dropped. She didn't know this man, but every instinct screamed that he carried the next blow. Jonathan's face hardened. You shouldn't be here. The man's lips curved into a cruel smile. Oh, Jonathan. You of all people should know. I've always belonged here. And tonight, I'll take back what was stolen. The ballroom erupted into chaos again, as the stranger's words echoed like a death knell. Guests screamed questions. The Harringtons turned pale with dread, and Martha felt her knees weaken. She didn't know who he was, but she knew one thing for certain. The night had only just begun. The mysterious man steps fully into the light, and reveals something in his hand. A ring, identical to the one Henry Harrington once wore. He raises it high and says, This proves I am the rightful heir, and I will see this family burn before I let them steal it again. The courthouse was suffocating with heat and whispers. Every seat was filled, every camera light blinking red, and every gaze fixed on the man who had once seemed untouchable. Jonathan sat tall in his expensive suit, his smirk plastered across his face like armor. Even as the evidence piled against him, even as witnesses shook under oath, he leaned back with the arrogance of a king certain his throne could never be toppled. Across the room sat the boy and his mother, their clothes simple, their faces pale but steady. The boy clutched a single folder to his chest like it was the most important possession in the world. His mother placed a hand on his shoulder, her fingers trembling, but her eyes burning with a quiet strength. The crowd saw them as small, powerless. Jonathan saw them as nothing. But in that folder was the storm he had never prepared for. The judge's gavel cracked against the bench. "Mr. Jonathan, do you have anything to say before we review the final evidence?" Jonathan stood, straightening his tie. "Your Honor," he began smoothly, his voice rolling like silk across the room. "This circus has gone on long enough. These people, these so-called victims, they are nothing but opportunists. I have built empires. I have fed this city. And now, because of jealousy and petty hatred, they want to drag my name through the mud." He turned, sweeping his arm toward the audience. "But look at me. Look at them. Who do you believe truly built this world? Who deserves to stand at the top?" A murmur rippled through the gallery. Some nodded, swayed by his confidence, his practiced charm. For a moment, it felt like Jonathan might walk free again, escaping justice like smoke slipping through fingers. Then the boy stood. At first, no one noticed. He was small, his presence barely a whisper compared to Jonathan's booming voice. But when he cleared his throat, when he lifted his chin and stepped into the aisle, silence fell. Every eye turned. Every camera focused. The boy clutched the folder tighter, and though his knees trembled, his voice rang clear. "My name is Elijah," he said, "and I'm here to tell the truth." Jonathan chuckled, shaking his head. "The truth? From a child? This is pathetic. Sit down, boy, before you embarrass yourself." But Elijah did not sit down. He walked forward, step by step, until he stood before the judge's bench. His mother rose behind him, tears shining in her eyes, but she did not call him back. She knew. This was his moment. Elijah opened the folder. Inside were papers, photographs, contracts, all marked with Jonathan's name. But more than that, there was something else. A recording. Elijah pressed play, and the courtroom filled with Jonathan's own voice. "Make sure the boy's mother never sees a cent threaten her if you have to. I don't care how it's done, just make her disappear. No one will ever believe her anyway." The sound hit the room like thunder. Gasps erupted. The judge leaned forward, eyes wide. The jurors shifted, horrified. Jonathan froze, his smirk faltering for the first time. His own voice betrayed him, echoing in the silence like a death knell. Elijah's small hands shook as he held the recorder higher. This is who he really is. He ruined families. He silenced anyone who stood in his way. But he couldn't silence me. Not anymore. The crowd roared. Journalists scribbled furiously. Cameras zoomed in. Jonathan's face drained of color, his mask crumbling as the walls closed in. He lunged forward, slamming his fist on the table. "That recording is fake. It's fabricated. Do you people really believe?" But his words drowned under the weight of the truth, now alive in the room. The judge banged the gavel again and again, but the uproar only grew. The people had seen, they had heard, and there was no taking it back. Jonathan's allies in the front row shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting toward the exits. One by one, they leaned away from him, distancing themselves from a man they now knew was finished. His empire wasn't cracking anymore. It was collapsing. Elijah turned to face him. For the first time, the boy's voice trembled, not from fear, but from fury. "You told me I was nothing. You laughed when my mom cried. You thought your money could erase us. But tonight, everyone sees you for what you are." Jonathan's lips curled into a snarl. "You little." But before he could finish, the judge's voice rang out, sharp and final. "Enough. This court has heard more than enough. The evidence is overwhelming. Mr. Jonathan, you will be remanded into custody immediately." Gasps turned to cheers. Officers moved forward, snapping cuffs onto Jonathan's wrists. He struggled, shouting curses, but the more he fought, the more pitiful he became. Gone was the king, the untouchable man. In his place stood a desperate criminal, dragged down by the weight of his own sins. As the officers pulled him away, Jonathan locked eyes with Elijah one last time. His glare burned with hatred, but beneath it, there was fear. The boy he once mocked had destroyed him. The mother rushed forward, pulling Elijah into her arms. She sobbed into his hair, whispering, you did it. My brave boy, you did it. The courtroom applauded, the sound rising like thunder, drowning out the last of Jonathan's protests as he was dragged through the doors. But the story did not end there. Outside the courthouse, crowds had gathered. Screens lit up across the city, broadcasting the verdict. For years, people had whispered about Jonathan's corruption, but now they had proof. And the proof had come from the smallest, most unlikely hero. Elijah stepped onto the courthouse steps, his mother's hand in his. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing, microphones thrust in his face. But Elijah didn't flinch. He raised his chin and said, "We were scared. But the truth is always stronger than fear." The crowd erupted. Cheers echoed down the street, voices chanting his name. For the first time, the boy felt the power of his voice, the power of standing up even when the world tried to silence him. Jonathan's car sped past in the distance, flanked by police vehicles, his face pressed to the window in rage and despair. His empire was ashes, his power gone. And the boy he underestimated had become the spark that set it all aflame. The night sky was clear, the air electric with change. Elijah looked at his mother, and for the first time in years, she smiled without fear. Together, they had won. Together, they had reminded the world that even the smallest voice could shake the tallest throne. But as the cameras kept flashing, as the cheers rolled on, Elijah whispered something only his mother could hear. This is just the beginning. Because in that moment, deep in his heart, Elijah knew his fight wasn't over. Jonathan may have fallen, but there were others like him. And Elijah, the boy no one believed in, was ready to face them all. The screen fades to black, but the echo of justice lingers in the air. And now it's your turn. Do you believe that even the smallest voice can change the world? If Elijah's courage moved you tonight, hit that subscribe button and join us. Because more stories like this are coming, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. And don't forget to comment below. What would you have done if you stood in Elijah's place?